Hello everyone, welcome to the Beginner's Guide to Enneacraft. This is one of the 3 decks coming in Phantom Revengers, of which this one is one built around flip monsters and pendulum monsters, of which all the monsters are both of those. And these guys are complicated. They are very, very complicated cards, which is why hopefully I can help you guys kind of learn and understand what this deck is designed to do and kind of break it down in a more digestible way. So, let's get into it. First off, we've got the 4 main deck big guys. We've got 3 Ostopisti. I'm just going to say their last name, that's all bold letters. 3 Pixia, 3 Mar, 1 Tail, and 3 Leon. So all of the big Enneacrafts share a few effects. The first is they all have the same scale effect, which is each time a monster is flipped face up, you can place an EC counter on this card, which I will explain what that is after we talk about these cards. And then at the end of the battle phase, if you have an Enneacraft card in your other Pendulum Zone, you can target a monster your opponent controls with less attack than this card and destroy it. So these guys are all removal in the scale, and then they also set up your EC counters, which will be important later. And then each of them can reveal themselves in hand to summon a monster from your hand in face-down defense position. That effect is not once per turn. In fact, none of the monster effects on any of the Enneacraft cards are once per turn, which is what makes them so powerful. And then they can all, so the way all of the Enneacrafts work is they react when your opponent does something. So let's say, for example, Pixia, when your opponent targets a card you control, you can immediately flip Pixia up from face down to then it'll banish a random card from your opponent's hand, and then then they'll all have an effect that activates when they're flipped or while they're face up. So Pixia, make sure none of your monsters can be targeted in the fields or graves as card effects. All of the Enneacraft monsters have different effects when flipped and different effects that happen when they flip. So Pixie is when your opponent triggers it, lets you banish a face down card. While it's flipped face up, they can't target things. After that is Mar. When he is flipped face up, you get to, or in order to flip him face up, your opponent needs to activate a card or effect, and then he will negate the activation and destroy that card. And then when he's flipped up, you get to change all monsters your opponent controls to face down defense position permanently. They cannot change their battle positions. That is insane. This is the best card in the archetype, at least in my opinion. This card is a phenomenal board breaker. You just get to set it, your opponent does something, you negate it and destroy it, and then you get to flip all their monsters face down permanently. Crazy card, love it. And then we have 1 Tail. The only reason we're on one of this is for meta reasons, just because the way the protection this card gives is not great at the moment. In order to flip it face up, your opponent needs to use a card or effect that would destroy a card in the field. Then you would flip this up, and monsters and Enneacraft spells you control cannot be destroyed by card effects for the rest of the turn. And then while it's flipped up, each time a monster is sent to your opponent's grave, they take 900 damage. That can stack up really quickly. In modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, people are pitching cards all the time. And then we have Leon, who, in order to be flipped face up, your opponent has to use a card or effect in response to your card or effect. And then when he flips, and then he will return up to 3 cards on the field to the hand, which is crazy. That's a really strong effect. And then while he's face up on the field, you get to, every time your opponent adds a card to their hand by a card effect, they take 900 damage. Definitely the weakest on-field effect, but like it's still not bad, and that plus Tail can stack up really quickly. Now I'll go ahead and take a detour from going into the little guys to talk about their field spell, which is really important to the game plan and also explains the EC counter mechanic. So during the end phase, once per turn, you remove all EC counters from your field, and if you do, your opponent takes 900 for each. So this is how this deck wins the game. It will not be attacking. You will be burning them to death with your EC counters. All you need is, I believe, was it 9? Yeah, 9 EC counters in total to win the game immediately. That's not including the damage you could deal with Leon or Tail, so that can get lower very quickly, and it is not terribly difficult to have 2 scales, you theoretically flip 5 monsters in a turn, you just win the game. And then its other effects is you can target any number of Enneacraft Pendulum monster cards you control. Because it says monster cards, that means your scales as well. You can return them to the hand, and then if an Enneacraft Pendulum monster you control is flipped face up, you can during the main phase, you can choose to either return it to the hand or place it in your Pendulum Zone. That effect is once per turn, though, so you only get to do that one time, unfortunately. So that explains the EC counter mechanic, and now I'll get into the little guys, which are similar to the big guys in some ways, different in other ways. So its scale effect, it has the EC counter effect that the big guys do. However, the scale effect that all the little guys has is you can pay 900 life to reveal 3 Enneacraft cards from your deck. Your opponent randomly picks 1 for you to add to your hand, and then you shuffle the rest back. So basically, that is the reason why we're mostly on 3-ofs, so you can reveal 3 of the same card and then add that card to your hand. This is a really strong effect to have on all 4 of these monsters, which is why we're maxed out on all of them. And then each of them have the same effect to reveal themselves in the hand to summon a monster face down. However, they also have different win triggers to be flipped and then on flip effects. So the Tromar, let's say, yeah, let's do the lowercase for this one. The Tromar lets you flip it when your opponent uses an effect that would special summon a monster, and then you get to add an Enneacraft card from your deck to your hand. All of the little guys, their on flip effect, or their when your opponent meets their condition effect, lets you add an Enneacraft card. They all have that one in common. And then when it's flipped, you get to negate the effects of one effect monster your opponent controls until the end of the turn. The Oknir lets you triggers when your opponent activates a card in the grave or banishment, and then on flip, lets you shuffle up to 3 cards from your opponent's grave or banishment into the deck. The Orgia, or let's just go Org, lets you triggers when your opponent activates a monster effect in the hand, and then its flip effect is you can destroy a monster your opponent controls. And then the Alazone triggers when your opponent activates a card or an effect that adds a card from their deck to their hand. And then on flip lets you banish face up a random card from your opponent's hand until the end phase, unfortunately. So all of these cards are really good, and they do make up the backbone of how this deck works. Ideally, you'll be cycling through all of these in your turn 1, setting some of them face down, using some of them to get your back row, so on and so forth. And now we'll get into the other 2 spell cards of the deck. First is Enneacraft Release. This is just a consistency tool, allows you to place an Enneacraft Pendulum monster from your deck into the Pendulum Zone, and then in the grave, except the turn it was sent there, you can banish it to add an Enneacraft from your extra deck to your hand. Decent recovery. It's just a good consistency piece. We love to see it. And then Enneacraft Rebirth. So this card's really important for the strategy for 2 reasons. The first is its first effect. You can shuffle any number of Enneacraft monster cards from your hand and or field into the deck or extra, then draw cards equal to numbers shuffled. And then if your opponent, so let me go over that effect. Usually your turn 1 will consist of going scale a little guy, use it to search another little guy, or release to get the little guy. And then you will use the other little guy to search Rebirth, and then Rebirth will shuffle those back in a deck to let you draw 2. The other thing that matters about Rebirth is that in the graveyard, if your opponent normal or specials a monster, you can banish it to activate one of its effects, which is to summon an Enneacraft from your hand in face-down defense, or the realistically more important effect, to change a face-down defense mission Enneacraft to face-up. So this is what allows you to trigger Mar on your opponent's turn, because Mar can only trigger during your turn to flip itself up. When your opponent activates a card or effect, unfortunately this isn't just an Omni Negate that then books everything on either turn. God, I wish. But it does allow you to trigger Mar on your opponent's turn, which is super important. It means this deck has a full board permanent Book of Eclipse going first, which is fantastic. Not good in every matchup, which is where we'll get into the weaknesses of this deck, but in the matchups it is good. Man, it is phenomenal. It's such a strong effect. So Rebirth is critical to the strategy. You always want to be getting this card into rotation on your turn 1, along with Mar. It's your best and biggest form of interaction. After that is the non-engine we went with, which is 3 Ash Blossom, which this is in here because, spoiler, Draco Tail is our worst matchup by a lot. And Ash Blossom is really good at dealing with the Draco Tail trap cards. Perulia is also a scary card for this deck to deal with, and this deals with Perulia. One of the big benefits of this deck, though, is that it doesn't care about Fua, so you don't have to burn your Ash Blossom on Fua. Ash is also just good at dealing with cards that this deck will struggle with. The Mitsu cards can be scary, so like stopping them from doing Mitsu combo against like Mitsu Yummy is really good. Sol and Luna, which you probably don't recognize this card because this is one of the only decks that can make really good advantage of this card. You target a monster you control and a monster your opponent controls, and then you would flip your monster face up and your opponent's monster face down. So you'll target one of your Enneacrafts, flip it face up, and then flip one of your opponent's monsters face down, which will then allow you to trigger that Enneacraft's effect. Hopefully, it'll be Mars. This card is really good as like a backbone to if you get hand trapped too much. It's a card that means you don't have to find Rebirth over the course of your combo if you see it. It is a really good card in this deck specifically. I will say I'm not 100% sold on this card because Rebirth kind of does what it does, but better. That being said, this has been in all the topping lists as well, and it is like, I understand why you play it. It is a good card. I would definitely recommend playing it starting out. And then we have 3-Dimensional Fissure. I know, Floodgate in the main deck, you hate to see it, but again, Draco Tail is this deck's worst matchup. Di-Fi is phenomenal against Draco Tail, and it really doesn't affect this deck at all. This deck doesn't Pendulum Summon. If you noticed, all of the scales are 0. It's why I didn't even mention it. Which means you're not caring about what goes in your extra deck or not, so you can just Di-Fi at the start of your turn. Now you can't be Drolled, you can't be Ghost Ogred, you can't be Fimena'd turn 0. Just stops a bunch of really obnoxious cards from doing anything. And more importantly, going first, you can also draw into this card with your Rebirth, so you can get into it even easier. And then you can shut down Draco Tail, which is so important in this matchup. You have to be able to do that. It is mission critical that Draco Tail cannot trigger their cards like Pan and Urgula, because they will just blow your board out of the water. It also stops them from Fimena'ing, so like Lucius is no longer a starter. It's an insane card against that deck. It's also really good against like Yummy, and it's okay into some of the other matchups. It's too good a card in this deck not to run. And that's it for the main deck. I don't even have different versions of this deck because this deck is so tight in terms of its engine. If you notice, it's 31 cards that there's really not a whole lot you can mix this with. You could try it with other flip decks, but I think you're kind of just making Enneacraft worse if you do that. The only flip deck that I think is worth mentioning is you could play a small Mimighoul engine, which would be 3 dragon, 1 master, and then 1 or 2 room. So the way this engine works is that you would go normal Mimighoul Dragon. Dragon on summon would let you then search your Mimighoul Room. Mimighoul Room lets you summon a Mimighoul from your hand or deck to your field or face down to your opponent's field. And then you can book a monster face down. So this is a non-targeting Book of Moon that then allows you to summon Mimighoul Master. Mimighoul Master is a monster that can't be destroyed by battle or card effects while your opponent controls any face-down monsters or a Mimighoul, which they should have a face-down monster because of Room. So this guy won't be able to die, and on summon he searches a Mimighoul, but most importantly, during your opponent's main phase, you can change a face-down monster in the field to face-up attack or defense. So this is another way to flip up your Enneacrafts, which is super useful. Not crazy useful. This was a much more powerful tech before Rebirth was revealed, but this combo is not bad. I don't think it's crazy, and it is annoying. It takes up like 2 slots on your board, which ideally you're setting like 5 cards with Enneacraft, but it's an interesting idea at the very least, and I did want to bring it up. Then we have some of the other techs. The easiest one is Spirit of the Fallwind, which on normal just lets you search a flip monster. Not a bad consistency piece. I believe I saw a list that got top 8 at a recent regional using this, so it's legit. It's not bad. If you feel like the deck needs more consistency, go ahead and play this card. Then we have something this deck gets to uniquely use, which is Tribute Summons, because this deck doesn't have a normal summon, and you just spam out guys, so you can easily use them for tributes. The obvious place most people will go with that is the Vanity's pair, which is Vanity's Fiend, which neither player can special monsters, or Vanity's Ruler, which is just a higher level, so it takes 2 tributes, and your opponent cannot special summon monsters. These are really evil, and they are probably really good in the side deck for this deck. It's hard for me to not recommend these in the side deck, specifically for decks like Mitsurugi and Dracotail, where these are probably going to win you the game. And then there's Zaborg, which is my favorite tech you can play in this deck, which Zaborg, basically on Tribute Summon, which it's a level 8, so you'll take 2 tributes, lets you target a monster in the field and destroy it. Then if the monster you popped was a light monster, which, spoiler, you're going to be using it to pop itself, both players then send as many cards as possible from the extra deck to the grave, but not more than the level or rank of the monster of the destroyed monster. So basically, you send 8 monsters from your extra deck to the grave if you pop Zaborg. And notably, if the monster you tributed were light, you get to choose the card your opponent sends. So if you tributed one of your big Enneacrafts, which are all light, you get to choose the monsters your opponent sends. So you get to rip apart their extra deck, and you get to send about 8 cards from your extra deck to the grave. Notably, I did not put an extra deck in here because there's no reason to play one. One very important thing I forgot to note is that the Enneacraft's effect to summon themselves locks you into summoning monsters face down exclusively. You can only special summon monsters face down. That is why this deck can't really mix with a bunch of stuff either, because it locks you out of most cards, locks you out of any extra deck monsters. So yeah, not really worth mentioning anything else you can mix with it in terms of generics. Otherwise, this deck would be busted to hell. But Zaborg does let you just send 8 cards from your extra deck to the grave. There's tons of stuff you could do with that, but I'm going to mention my favorite, which is sending some amount of Jurak extra deck monsters along with Jurak Astero, which can, during your opponent's turn, banish itself and another Jurak to summon the Jurak Meteor from your extra deck, which is a full board wipe, which is hilarious. Notably, probably not amazing to do this play because I don't know, wiping your own board in this deck seems kind of rough, but man, it's funny. And then there's one other tech I want to mention, which is, I didn't put in the side, but I meant to, which is Gap the Divine Soldier, which has the very simple effect to change all monsters in the field to face up attack, or changes all monsters to attack position. So what you would do is you tribute summon this, and it'll force flip all your monsters. What this allows you to do is set up a very funny Enneacraft FTK. By flipping 5 monsters in one turn with 2 scales up, you just win the game. You just Enneapolis burn them to death. But it's like a 3-card combo that requires you to draw a gap, which is terrible. So I don't recommend this if you want to win with this deck. But it is a funny thing you can do. Anyway, I will now go into the replay I have. I don't have a real combo for the deck, but I do just have what a general turn 1 will look like. So we started with 5 Enneacraft names, which is absolutely what you want to be starting with. What we are going to do, though, is we're going to start by going reveal org to summon Leon, which is going to mean that if our opponent tries to hand trap us, we get to bounce 3 of our own cards back to the hand, which can be really useful. And we also set org, which if our opponent uses a monster effect in the hand, something like a Droll or an Ash or an Ogre or something, we get to chain this and then search a card out of our deck. So even if they Droll us, we'll still be able to get 1 search before that. We're then going to scale the Alazone to search one of our names. It's going to be the Release, which is going to get the Alknir. Alknir is going to get another card. It's going to be the Rebirth. We're going to Rebirth, put back to our scales, and the extra Leon we drew. Because we already have the Leon set, there's no reason to keep it in the hand, so we get to draw 3 cards. We draw into, unfortunately, a Rebirth, a Tromar, and a Tail. Only one of those cards is live. And it does show one of the weaknesses of this deck, which is you kind of have to draw into the good cards, right, off of the Rebirth. It's a bit luck dependent, which is unfortunate, but it is kind of how it goes. So we're then going to scale the Tromar, which we have not used, so we then get to get Mar to our hand. So now we get to summon the Mar and summon the Tail. And we're going to use the Mar, revealing. And so this is another important mechanic about the Enneacrafts, which is when you're using the effects to reveal in hand, because they're not once per turn and they don't require you to show the monster you're special summoning, you just have to reveal the name you're using the effect in hand of. You can use one Enneacraft monster to summon all the other ones from your hand, and your opponent will not know where those monsters are set or what monsters are set. So you can use one Enneacraft to summon 4 others from your hand, and your opponent just has to guess what they are and guess where they are, which is horrifying and gives this deck a huge leg up. It's kind of like you're setting trap cards, which is really cool. In terms of flavor, I think this deck is one of the coolest Konami's ever made. Unfortunately, I just wish it was a little better. So this is where I'm going to get into the weaknesses of the deck. So this deck has a big problem with 2 things, which is chain blocking and optional effects. So I'll get into the optional effects first because it's the one that is less of a big deal. So this mostly matters against Draco Tail, but the Draco Tail Pan and Flame can set a Draco Tail spell trap when they are used as material for a fusion summon, and then they have the optional effect to destroy a monster or spell trap depending on if used Urgula or Pan. Because that effect is optional to destroy those monsters, Tail cannot chain to them to protect your monsters, which means it just doesn't do anything against Pan or Urgula, which is miserable, and this is how every optional chain effect works. If the card does something and then allows you to destroy a card, Tail can't do anything about it, which is so rough. It's a really rough thing, but not as rough as the biggest issue, which is an issue with Pixia and Tail. If your opponent uses, let's say, does their Mitsurugi combo, right? And uses Murakumo as chain 1 to destroy the board, and then uses Habakiri as chain 2 that they use as material to ritual summon this to search. If your opponent does that, you cannot respond to the effect to destroy all of your monsters, which means your board gets wiped and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't chain Tail because you're not directly responding to the effect that destroyed, and you can't chain Pixia. Well, obviously your board's not getting targeted, but if your opponent was to use a targeted effect as chain 1 and then a non-targeted effect as chain 2, you wouldn't be able to chain the Pixia, which is also horrifying. It's so rough. Draco Tail does the same thing where it uses this, where it goes chain 1, Arthalion to bounce your board, targeting your monsters, chain 2, any Draco Tail effect to set a card, and now your Pixia can't respond. It's the worst thing about this deck by a mile, and it means this deck can't really beat Draco Tail, and it can't really beat Mitsurugi, and it's why I can't recommend it if you're wanting to bring this deck to even a regional. I think this deck is probably not good enough. The only way you're going to be winning with it is if your opponent just doesn't understand how your deck works, and you get matched up into, like, Yummy and stuff all day. Because I think this deck does beat every other deck in the format that is real. I think this deck is really good, incredible even, into Yummy. Yummy can do very, very little against this deck, and specifically a Yummy build that is not Mitsurugi, because the Mitsurugi cards are super rough for this deck. I think this deck is quite good into pretty much all of the Canine decks. Canine doesn't really have any way to, like, deal with the set monsters. You're just gonna mar them, and then they kind of lose, which is really funny. Vanquish Soul doesn't really have a good way to deal with it either. In general, most of the other decks don't have a way to cheese this, which is so unfortunate because it means in a different format, this deck would probably be so much better than it is. But unfortunately, it is just bogged down by the fact that, like, it just has those 2 horrible matchups. So I would recommend this deck for a local setting. I think it is an incredibly fun deck if you like control decks. This is peak control deck. However, because of its specific weaknesses to Mitsurugi and Draco Tail, I would not recommend it for regionals or YCSs or, above. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video. I hope you at least mess with Enneacraft online or in person or whatever. This deck will probably be really cheap once these cards get sold everywhere. There's been annoying delays that haven't gotten them everywhere, so hopefully people can get their hands on them. I haven't been able to get my hands on them, unfortunately. I'd love to be playing with these cards. But anyway, hope you all have a good day, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.